This is a crazy looking lens, and it can do some pretty wild stuff like this. These days, most lenses out there are pretty boring. I mean, how many 50mm do we need, right? That's why when Kase reached out to see if I'd be interested in trying this reflex lens, I immediately said yes. Not only is a fixed 200mm prime lens, which is pretty interesting in itself, but as you just saw a moment ago, it can do some crazy stuff. This should be anything but boring. I have to admit though that I was pretty skeptical about this lens at first. While it's pretty compact for a 200mm lens, it's not much smaller than my all-time favorite 28 to 200mm. The camera even matches the case on aperture. They are both f5.6 at 200mm. So why would anyone want something like this when you can have that and much more in a similar package? But as you should know by now, that is not the right way of thinking about this lens. Because with a reflex lens like this one, you can do things that are just not possible with a normal regular lens like this one. You can tell just by looking at it that this lens is different. The design is kind of wild, but that's what creates that crazy donut bokeh. But let's start with the basics. This is a 200mm fixed prime lens. You might remember that last year I tried to shoot in my hometown with a 135mm prime lens, and that was already pretty challenging because the lens was pretty limited in tight spaces, and that was an autofocus 1.8 lens. Now enter this Kase reflex lens. It's a manual focus lens. It has no stabilization, it's a fixed 200mm focal length and a fixed f5.6 aperture. Talk about limitations, right? These limitations come with pros and cons, as usual. On one hand, it can be extremely challenging to shoot with this lens, not only because 200mm is quite a lot, but also because the minimum focusing distance is 2 meters or 6 feet. That's quite far. But on the other hand, once again, it forces you to think differently. It definitely made me think differently during these past 2 weeks I've been using it for, and now I'm gonna show you some of the images I made with this very unique lens. This past week I visited 2 spots I go to often. The first one, the nearby canyons around here, they are beautiful. You've seen them in my videos before. But anyway, I went to a very specific spot where there is this beautiful tree that I've captured many times in the past. But until a few days ago, all my images were kind of the same. I was trying to capture the shape of the tree against the beautiful mountains in the background. But of course, that was not an option with the Kase lens. It's a 200mm fixed prime. So I came up with this image, well, different variations with the branch a little bit higher or lower in the frame against the mountain in the background, and this other one of another branch with another tree in the lower part of the frame. Now, I don't like the photos I got with the reflex lens because I don't like what it's doing to the background there. I prefer the one that I took with the 28 to 200mm lens actually. But it's a photo I never saw before, and it's a photo that I would have never seen if it weren't because I had this lens at that moment. A very similar thing happened at this church the other day. It's a place where I usually go wide, and when I go onto, trying to capture little details, I usually reach for the 85mm lens. But once again, because I had this one on my camera, I had to look for something different, and I came up with this image that I actually quite like a lot. Now, this lens is not suited for every situation, because if you try to capture distant landscapes like this one that you see here, or a foggy landscape, the background doesn't look very different from a normal regular lens, so you might as well use those instead. But even when you find an object in that landscape, so you can use that bokeh that this lens offers, sometimes it doesn't really work. Like these photos, I don't love them because the lens is making the background pretty busy, pretty distracting, in my opinion. But there are certain situations where everything comes together and the photos look absolutely beautiful. They almost look like paintings, like these photos I'm showing you here of these flowers and weeds, these haystacks there with the background. I love what it's doing to the background here. The rendering in this photo is beautiful, and this one especially I really love. Just another example, in this case I was blurring the sky in the background. But of course, a lens like this one is gonna be great for portraits. That's not something I do often, so I asked my wife Rachel to take photos of me. So she was the one behind the camera in these photos. They actually look cool, and some of them look really crazy, like this one. Look at the background. I don't know, I love it. I think they are quite beautiful, and this is where I realize about the true potential of this lens. I gave it a try with the cats and dogs that we have in the farm, and you know, the photos turned out nicely. It was pretty hard to make them because they were moving all the time. And again, this is a manual focus lens, and even though it's a 5.6, it is a very shallow depth of field because it's a 200 millimeters. For every sharp photo you see here, I had to take quite a few, but I mean, it takes practice and you get better with time, of course. I wanted to step it up, so I went out to photograph some storks with this manual 200 millimeter lens. And as you can see, the struggle to get those birds in focus was real. The only sharp photos I have of the storks were the ones that were on their nests resting. And as you can see, the background is very busy here. I don't really love it. But to my surprise, again, the images that I was failing at making because the storks were not in focus had something. I don't know. I was looking at them through the viewfinder on the screen of my camera, and I like them. So I started to intentionally take slightly out of focus photographs of the storks. And that led to this shot of the stork against the castle on the hill. It's a beautiful photo that I love. And I know that this is not for everyone because it's out of focus, but I think it's beautiful. As you can see, this lens demands creativity, a different way of thinking about your photographs. For example, I tried to do some still life photography, as you can see here, like I did with my Bronica medium format camera a few years ago. I always loved those images, and I was curious if this lens could create something similar or even better of ordinary objects. At first, I was using it as I would use any regular normal lens, as you can see, and as expected, the results were kind of disappointing. It was when I shifted my perspective, I turned around and shot against the light, trying to capture the silhouettes of the objects, that everything came together. And I got what I think are two beautiful images of a garden rake here and an old teapot here. Very different from the images I captured with the Bronica, but that's the point about this lens. This lens is not for everyone, and definitely not for every situation. But when used creatively, this lens can produce quite unique images. The 2 weeks I've spent with this lens were not enough to make the most out of it. This lens requires time and dedication to get to know how it works and when it doesn't. This lens is most likely not going to come with me on photography trips, first of all because I don't have any more room in my camera bag, but most importantly because I think it's not the right tool for those times. But again, I do see myself reaching for it when I'm stuck creatively or I want to experiment and create something more unique. Like in the summertime, my least favorite time of the year for photography. It was really nice to have this little project to keep me thinking creatively. And that's something I look forward to using this lens for again in the future. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.